to this PACE Academy Alumni Association and PACE Academy Association of Black Alumni Roundtable event on voting. We've got a great panel of alumni here. My name is Julie Newman. I'm of the class of 1996, along with Sarah Elizabeth Langford, who is also class of 96, Josh Belinfante, class of 1995, Ben Thorpe, class of 2000, and Teos Wynn from class of 05. So we've got a good representation of the 90s and the 100s here. And I really want to welcome everyone and thank you so much for being a part of this event. I think, you know, I hear that we've got one of the most RSVP'd non-alcoholic alumni-related events. So I think this is going to be great. And it's wonderful that the PACE, the Alumni Association, and the PACE Black Alumni Association are really giving us this forum so that we can talk about these issues that are going to be so important over the next few weeks that we've been seeing in the news. So I just want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Haley for putting this together, and we're really excited. On the panels here with me today, first of all, we have my classmate, Sarah Elizabeth Langford. And Sarah Elizabeth is the former First Lady of Atlanta. She's previously worked for Congressman John Lewis. She has done a lot of get out the vote for local and national campaign events. And she's very involved in the League of Women Voters. So thank you very much, Sarah Elizabeth, for being here today. And we're very excited to have you. We've got Josh Belinfante from the class of 95. And Josh is an attorney with the Robbins firm in Atlanta. He has represented the state of Georgia in numerous election cases, and he is the former executive counsel to Governor Sonny Perdue while he was in office. Ben Thorpe, who sadly couldn't be with us tonight, but he did tape a part of it for us. Ben was previously a litigator at Bondurant, Nixon, and Elmore, and he litigated the partisan gerrymandering challenge to North Carolina's congressional districts that ended up in front of the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court in 2019. He's argued a challenge to the state of Georgia's voter purge statute before the 11th Circuit of Court of Appeals. And he also represented Mayor Bottom's campaign after the 2017 election. And what I think is very cool is both he and his debate partner wrote election law-related amicus briefs for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. They were on opposite sides of the issue. Finally, we have Teos Wynn, who's class of 2005, and he is the founder and CEO of the Perfect Love Foundation, which provides resources to undeserved communities. He is the founder of the Millennial Civil Rights, which promotes and educates individuals about modernized human and civil rights in Georgia and over 30 other states. And he has a variety of honors, including the Phoenix Award, which was presented to him by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. So I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and I'm very excited to have all of you here. We're going to start off with, if Haley doesn't mind, we're going to start off and actually do Ben's presentation. He taped just a little presentation for us, and I thought that that might be a good thing to start it off. And then we're going to have just we're going to briefly hear from everyone, and then we're going to get into some Q&A, which I think is what everyone really wants to hear about what's happening with the election, whether or not it's absentee voting, whether or not it's what's going to happen on the day of election or afterwards. So thank you very much. And Haley, I think if you can get the split screen going. But we can't hear.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Thorpe. I just wanted to start by saying thanks to the Alumni Association and to the PACE Academy Black Alumni Association for putting on this event, and thanks to everyone for being here. Also, apologies to my fellow panelists and to everyone that's joined that I'm not there with you live, or at least as live as we've gotten used to over the last 7 months. I assure you I would rather be with all of you right now. Among other reasons, I know that my good friend Josh Belinfante is speaking after me, and to the extent he takes exception to anything I say in the next few minutes, I just want everyone to understand first that, there's room for genuine, good faith disagreement about some of these legal issues. And second, and more importantly, my comebacks in the Q&A would have been truly devastating. So with that, I'll dive right in. You're going to hear from some others about some of the issues that are dominating the headlines today with respect to this presidential election, absentee ballots, lines on election day, etc. What I want to do is give a little background on a broader question, which is this. As elections approach, we often hear the rallying cry, every vote counts, or we hear our system described as one person, one vote. What we really mean is that my vote should count, your vote should count, and that for that to have meaning, they should count equally. And there are a couple sentences in a US Supreme Court case that put that far better than I can. The right to vote freely for a candidate of one's choice is of the essence of a democratic society, and any restrictions on that right strike at the heart of representative government. And the right of suffrage can be denied by a debasement or a dilution of the weight of a citizen's vote just as effectively as by wholly prohibiting the free exercise of the franchise. So I've buried the lead a little bit. That's a quote from Reynolds v. Sims, a 1964 case that is really the last of 4 critical voting rights cases from that period that inform the way we understand both the right to vote and the role of courts in protecting that right. To understand those cases and many of the legal issues that come up today around the right to vote, it's important to understand the history. The principal way in which you and I are represented in legislative bodies, whether we're talking about city council, state house, state senate, or US House, is by individual members in single member districts. Again, I have to go back a step, and this time to something else that's in the news right now, the census. The Constitution requires that representatives be apportioned among the several states following a count of the whole number of persons in each state every 10 years. This has happened in every year, ending in 0 with one exception since 1790. I'm going to return to some census issues at the end, but for the purpose of discussing districts, it's important to understand that the census gives us the picture of our population that mapmakers use to determine how those districts are drawn. That process, unsurprisingly, is called redistricting, and it generally also occurs every 10 years in the year following the census. There are many ongoing battles about how redistricting should occur, and I'll cover some of them in a moment, but everyone should understand that there's now agreement that redistricting must occur after the new census for obvious reasons. If I want to draw a statewide map of districts, and I stick with a map that has a snapshot of where the population lived 10 years ago, I'm going to end up with real disparities in how many people actually live in each district. Why do we care? Well, should 50,000 people have as much representation in the House of Representatives as 150,000 people in a legislature that's apportioned based on population? No, that's transparently unequal. But in 1964, that was the situation, not just for US House seats, but for state legislatures across most of the country. Alabama, which is where Reynolds v. Sims, a state legislative case, came from, hadn't redistricted since 1901. And it's not rocket science to understand why this never changed. The legislators refusing to redistrict were the direct beneficiaries of keeping the system unequal. So why did it take so long for courts to step in and correct the problem? Well, until it decided a case called Baker versus Carr in 1962, the Supreme Court took a hands-off approach to malapportionment. In a 1946 case, Justice Frankfurter famously said that courts should stay out of, quote unquote, the political thicket. By 1962, though, it was a mostly different court, and the stubbornness of the problem was more apparent. Legislatures simply weren't going to fix themselves. In any event, Baker announced the rule that these sorts of challenges were justiciable, meaning that the courts were competent to hear them. But it didn't really change the rules on the ground or put in place what we now think of as the one person, one vote rule. That took a few more cases. I've mentioned Reynolds, which came from Alabama, and part of the reason I've gone on at such length about this here is that the 2 other seminal cases that announced the rule came from Georgia. Gray versus Sanders in 1963 struck down the county unit system, sort of a mini electoral college for statewide primaries that had clear and intended effect of minimizing the weight of urban voters relative to rural voters, which was really at the heart of the malapportionment problem more broadly. The majority opinion in that case said, the concept of political equality can mean only one thing: one person, one vote. Westbury V Sanders argued a week after Reynolds, but actually announced first in February 1964, came from right here. Voters in the 5th Congressional District, which included Fulton County, as it still does today, brought suit because the 5th District had more than double the population of the average district in the state. These were districts that had been drawn all the way back in 1931. As the court put it, that malapportionment contracted the value of some voters' votes and expanded the value of other voters' votes. So there's some local history at the heart of some of the most important voting rights cases ever to have been decided. But I don't want to leave folks with the impression that the one person, one vote rule, though it is and should be clearly settled, has resolved all controversy around redistricting. To the contrary, the last 55 years have seen waves of litigation and some similarly important decisions around other aspects of redistricting that ultimately go to the same question: are voters' votes being given equal weight? I'm not going to cover these in the same detail, in part for reasons of time, and in part because I litigated one of the cases and I'm trying to keep this family friendly. But there's a term I think you've all heard that captures a number of these threads: gerrymandering. And there are two species of gerrymandering that have been of particular concern for voting rights advocates: racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering. I'm going to touch briefly on racial gerrymandering because I think some of my fellow panelists are going to talk about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which among other things makes it illegal to draw districts that intentionally dilute the voting power of racial minorities. Part of the reason I'm touching on it briefly is that the contours of racial gerrymandering law are now fairly nuanced. And I say that not only with respect to courts, but also with respect to legislatures and how they attempt to avoid litigation around racial gerrymandering. By contrast, the current state of the law on partisan gerrymandering lacks any nuance whatsoever. For 30 years, since a case out of Indiana had resulted in a very fractured Supreme Court opinion, there had been a real question of whether, when, and how the federal courts would step in to help police an escalating crisis, districts drawn with surgical precision to ensure particular partisan outcomes. The question was not only whether sorting voters into districts based on their party affiliation or past votes violates the Constitution, and there are a number of different arguments as to why it does or doesn't, but whether federal courts may go there at all. Whether, to return all the way to Baker versus Carr, the question is even justiciable. Last summer, we got the answer in a 5-4 opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts in a case called Rucho versus Common Cause. Partisan gerrymandering, whatever the harm, lies beyond the competence of the federal courts. I will say that the ultimate result in Rucho, while disappointing, was not incredibly surprising. We brought that case back in 2016, and many of our arguments were tailored to Justice Kennedy, who by virtue of various opinions on the issue was long viewed as the swing vote on this question. Though we had won in the lower court in North Carolina after an October 2017 trial, it took another 18 months to get before the Supreme Court. And by the time that happened, unfortunately, Justice Kennedy had retired. Okay, so to close the loop on all of this, let's get back to the census for a moment, because the census and what comes next for Georgia is really the reason for my endless redistricting tutorial. If I can find my place. So first, as of last Friday at 6 a.m., the census count is complete. If you were planning on doing that tomorrow, you can check that off your list. There was litigation about whether the count, which was initially supposed to conclude October 31st, could be shortened. For practical purposes, that litigation is now over. But the Supreme Court last Friday agreed to hear on an expedited basis a separate case regarding the administration's plan to exclude persons who are in the country illegally from the population count that will then be used for congressional apportionment. From my perspective, the administration is squarely on the wrong side of that question, but I can't tell how that will go, and I would encourage you to follow that argument, which happens on November 30th. Longer term, now that the census is complete, decennial redistricting is next. The Georgia General Assembly that you elect on November 3rd will draw the maps, State House, State Senate, U.S. House, that will be in place for the next 10 years, meaning until the 2032 elections. At present, both chambers of the Georgia General Assembly and the governor's office, obviously, are controlled by Republicans. I will say this, if both chambers remain in single party control, I think that given the Supreme Court's decision in Rucho, the incredibly powerful redistricting software and data available to map makers, and the extraordinary pressure from the national party to redistrict for extreme partisan advantage, I really worry that we will end up with a set of maps that is just incoherent with respect to allowing lawmakers to represent communities. I understand the appeal for a single party in control of the process. I just don't think that model of representation is very sustainable or allows what we talk about when we think about freedom of association and the effectiveness of people to join together for political ends. Okay, so I'm going to end on a higher note. I want to close by just thanking everyone again, including my fellow panelists, for joining the event. I've been quite frankly annoying people about voting rights for years. And so even in this 10th season, when it comes to politics, the level of engagement that people have right now on this really core issue is very exciting. And my hope is that it persists beyond November 3rd, regardless of the result, to the redistricting process, to next year's municipal elections, and to the 2022 cycle. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and I hate that I'm missing my fellow panelists and the Q&A. Just wish everyone well. Thanks.
Well, we thank Ben so much. We're sorry that we couldn't be there. And Josh, I got to tell you, I really thought you were going to come across the screen and throttle Ben. So, you know, you did really good keeping your composure there. I briefly would like to talk about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that Ben alluded to. I know that this is an alumni group, so we all had our American history at Pace, and everyone is very familiar with the time of Jim Crow and the issues that we had with in terms of both segregation and the fact that in America, especially in the South, African Americans were denied the right to vote for a very long time. And it wasn't until we had a variety of court cases which led up to the 1965 Voting Rights Act that really created the situation where we did have a more universal suffrage than we had before, where we really did have the one vote, one person. Most importantly, in terms of changes from the Jim Crow era restrictions, is it got rid of such things as literacy tests. Poll tests actually came through a bunch of court cases and poll taxes, but it got rid of the literacy tests, and it also provided no longer restrictions on registration. It originally was set up to cover the states in the Old South, and it was basically, there was a formula that if less than 50% of a voting age population was registered to vote in that state, or if less than 50% of that state's of that population voted in the 1964 presidential election, then you would have been covered by the Voting Rights Act. It guaranteed the right to register to vote. And also what it guarantees is the right for you to vote, even if you have a limited English proficiency, which is still germane. And I can tell you, I live in Doraville. That is an issue that we're dealing with every day. Specifically, we've got, there are the different sections. Sections 1 have the literacy test. Section 2, in terms of not being able to deny the right to vote. Section 3 relates to the 15th Amendment and the application of the 15th Amendment. And then you get to the juicy parts, which are Section 4 and Section 5. And Section 4 is where Section 4 and Section 5 is where we get into the pre-clearance, where if a state legislature passed a law that could infringe upon the right to vote, and whether or not it had to do with voting rights, whether or not it had to do with voting registration, or as Ben alluded to, redistricting, you had to get what was called pre-clearance from the Justice Department. And that was in existence up until the Supreme Court in 2013 ruled in Shelby versus Holder that the formulas that we were using, which go back to the 60s, are no longer good formulas, and basically it got rid of the whole idea of pre-clearance. So there is no longer a Justice Department pre-clearance of any of these election laws or redistricting. As a matter of fact, this will be Georgia's first redistricting where we won't necessarily have to get our maps passed by the Justice Department. So this is going to be a very big change for anyone. And specifically, and Ben alluded to this as well, that you cannot draw a district that intentionally dilutes the voting power of racial minorities, but that would be intentional. And that's where we get into this whole issue about partisan gerrymandering, that you can have partisan gerrymandering without racial gerrymandering. But this really gets more into a lot more technical issues in terms of the Voting Rights Act. What's important for us is that the Voting Rights Act in general created the ability for all of us, for everyone to vote. And it allowed, especially in America, in the South, the wholesale registration and a new group of people who were not able to vote before. And that is what we are now looking at in terms of voter ID rules, voter registration rules, and a lot of different issues with access to the polls, which may or may not be affected by this new Shelby County, by the Shelby County decision by the Supreme Court. But that's sort of more technical in terms of the Voting Rights Act. What we need to know is that we have one. And currently in Congress, as we all know, there's the John Lewis Act, which is currently in front of the Congress right now. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would be where we would be strengthening the Voting Rights Act that is currently on the books. But that's pretty plain and simple. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
May I interrupt you?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
please go ahead.
Just a comment. I guess, you speak, I think you did a great job, and thank you to everyone who was a part of this panel. I kind of like couldn't bite my tongue. I guess you did a great job of explaining the Voting Rights Act, and which, as you said, prohibited and methods from disenfranchising voters. And now I guess we can argue or we can disagree on if there are now more crafty ways that voters are disenfranchised. And when I think of voter access, I think, as you and Ben both said, I think of, one person, one vote. And I think of, like you said, the 1965 Voting Rights Act allowed us to all have the ability to vote. That is according to the law. However, to me, I think there's a question, or the issue that is so crucial today is whether or not regulations or laws that impact voting are, in fact, as some argue, simply ensuring a fair election and secure elections and the integrity of elections, or if they are actually more crafty ways to restrict and prohibit and disenfranchise voters. And again, because we're in a safe space, I know that we can all have different opinions. And I think I'll give us just a few examples of general methods that some would say those methods are ensuring a fair election with integrity, and others, sometimes I may feel these methods may disenfranchise voters and prohibit our right to vote. Some examples are ID laws. There is, like, I think it's in Texas, where you can vote with a gun license, and that can prove who you are in your ID. And you can't vote with a student ID. And again, when I mention these things, we should think of them from our perspective, but also from the perspective of individuals who are just situated differently in life. So I said, as requiring specific pieces of IDs to vote. In some jurisdictions, limiting the time frame of early voting. So again, think of individuals who have very strict jobs and have to really carefully fit in when they're going to vote, and don't have the freedoms like some of us have, who can just take off easily from work and go vote. Making it a felony in some jurisdictions to take someone's absentee ballot with their permission and turn it in for them. So think of how this may impact a voter. Also preventing organizations from paying companies to provide transportation to voters. I think of some of our frail elderly seniors. And so again, I just want to point out that there are some regulations that impact voting that some argue are just ensuring fair elections. Others say they are going totally against the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which should allow everyone who's eligible to vote. And I say that from an individual who's passionate about campaigns. My dad was the youngest ever Atlanta City Council member when he was about 23 before I was born. And then Kasim won his first mayoral election by, I think, 715 votes. So every vote is crucial to me personally. So sorry to interrupt you, Julie.
No, that's actually perfect, Sarah. And I think that really gives us a great jumping off point for me to shift over to Josh to talk about absentee balloting and kind of put a little pressure over on Josh because I think that goes into this whole idea with absentee balloting and our early in-person balloting. And I was hoping that Josh could sort of give us a rundown about how it works in Georgia, a basic explanation both in Georgia and maybe a little bit around the country because it is so germane and in the news right now. And I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about absentee ballots because it all sort of goes together: voter access, voter ID, voter registration, all coming to a head with whether or not it's absentee or early or in person. So let's take it over to Josh and put you in the hot seat.
Sure. No, thank you. And thanks for those who are here. Thanks to the fellow panelists. It's funny because Ben talked about, and Julie, you too, that I was going to reach through the thing. I taught Ben, which is, I'll just take credit that I taught him everything he knows, and that's how he ended up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court before me. But he's fantastic, as are all the people on here. Let me talk briefly about voting in Georgia, because that's what I know best. I can't tell you about many other states as well. But in Georgia, we have 3 ways of voting, as just about everybody knows. You can mail in what's called absentee voting. It's no excuse. It used to be that you had to say you would be out of the state or something like that. You can now just do it, as everyone who's on the active voter list got a voter registration mail from the secretary during the primary. You have to request an absentee ballot. Once you request it, you fill it out and send it back. Other than this summer, when the COVID had the secretary change that process around, almost all of that is run by your county election office. They receive your absentee ballot request, they check your absentee ballot to make sure that you are who you say you are, and then they mail you your absentee ballot itself. And then you mail that back to them and they count it. So in Georgia, while the secretary maintains a high profile, elections are largely run by counties. Counties choose where to put polling locations. Counties choose things like their business hours. So when we talk about the next way of voting, early in person, we started being able to do that last Monday. It was Fulton County that made the decision to open up, for example, Phillips Arena or State Farm Arena to do voting. And it's been at State Farm a huge success. Other places I think have done similar things, but that's where you go in and it's just like going in on election day. You use the touch screen, you vote, you turn in your paper ballot, and it is the same. And then there's election day voting. Those are the 3 ways you vote in Georgia. Just for kind of tips, I guess, we've seen, and I think you all know, we are breaking records literally every day in Georgia for early voting, and we've already broken absentee ballot voting records in Georgia. That's for a lot of reasons. A lot of groups across the spectrum have done a really good job in emphasizing the need to, or the ease of voting early in Georgia. People are nervous about going out in public. COVID has certainly continued to have an impact, but the numbers are huge in terms of what we're seeing. If you haven't requested an absentee ballot at this point, my suggestion to you, and this is not me speaking on behalf of a client, it's just me, go and vote early in person or go on election day. You don't want to risk issues with mail right now, so go vote early. And when you go vote early, the best times to do it are between 10 and noon, and then roughly from about 2 to 4. Voting tends to be in lines, a W. As people know, they all want to go vote early. or they want to vote at their lunch break, or they vote after work. So if you can get in between those times, do so. If you're wondering where to vote early, check your county election office website. They will tell you. The Secretary of State's website can send you there. There are lots of places, but again, it always depends on the county you're in. If you requested your absentee ballot and you haven't received it yet, or let's say you received it, you filled it out, and haven't sent it back, but you want to change your vote, new information, whatever else, you can still go vote in person. It is easier if you bring your absentee ballot with you. That's true if you vote early or on election day. It's just easier for the poll workers to get you through the line. It is not required. In most places, you will sign an affidavit saying that you wish your other ballot to be destroyed. It will be destroyed. But if you if your absentee ballot has been mailed and received, you're done. You've already voted. And so some of you heard during the last month or so, the Secretary talked about there are about 1,000 double votes in Georgia. Most of that were people doing exactly that. They weren't sure if their ballot had been counted, and so they voted in person after voting absentee, or they wanted to change their vote, and they ultimately could not. Who can deliver your absentee ballot? This is something Sarah raised, and we litigated this some in Georgia. Anyone in your immediate family or your household, so roommates, can deliver your ballot, absentee ballot, for you. If you are disabled, then your caregiver can deliver your ballot for you in addition to those individuals. But no, Georgia does not allow what is called ballot harvesting, where one person can collect and go into a location and collect a bunch of ballots and deliver them, or you have get out the vote efforts or whatever else, where someone will go and collect ballots. That was litigated. The courts determined that the state had a sufficiently strong interest in maintaining the law on that and to prevent pressure on people voting. It's the reason we don't allow your corporation or your employer to tell you how you vote or to vote. And for the same token, we don't allow anyone else to tell you to vote. The opportunity for pressure and fraud, the court found, was too high. When to deliver your absentee ballot, if you have it and you want to. Anytime before 7 o'clock on election day. And what that means is you can deliver it in person in a drop box. That's a new thing for this election and the primary before that. Check your Secretary of State's website. Will tell you where drop boxes are, or refer you to the counties, and they will tell you where the drop boxes are. When you put your ballot in a drop box, it is not the mail. You do not need a stamp. It is picked up by your county election office, and they count it during the election process. And I can get to that if there's a question. If you're going to mail it, it has to be, or drop it off, anything else, it has to be in the county election office by 7 o'clock p.m. on election day. That was one we litigated as well. The district court said that as long as it was postmarked on or before election day, if the election office got it within 3 days after election day, that was fine. The appellate court said, no, we're not going to do that, at least for this election. And there's some good reasons why the state has it where ballots have to be turned in, and you can think of them. As exit polls start coming in, you could easily have had absentee ballot application, or excuse me, absentee ballot envelopes postmarked with a Pitney Bowes or whatever else, and then those ballots start to get turned in, and it leads to issues that we have that would potentially impact the election. So that's your absentee ballot process. Lines. I already talked about kind of when to go. There was some litigation in Georgia just last week. We got an order saying the various parties had sued, saying that lines were too long in various counties. From the state's perspective, the state's position was those are county decided issues. We don't decide where things go. We provide technology and voting equipment. Counties, as the court recognized, had done a lot. Fulton in June, I think, had roughly 120 polling locations. They now have over 230. And DeKalb is similar. A lot of the counties that were named are doing better. So now the question, and I'll go ahead and take it before it comes, why were there lines last Monday and Tuesday? 3 reasons. One, overwhelming number of people going to vote early beyond what people had seen. And that's just part of it. Number 2, you have in early voting, not as many as polling locations as you have on election day. And so when you have increased numbers, few places to go vote, you get lines. Fulton County, as I understand it, Phillips Arena was run really well. There were some delays initially. Those delays were caused because Fulton delivered the wrong set of equipment to Phillips Arena. So when it got there, it wasn't ones that could be used at that time because the stuff has to be pre-programmed. That got fixed, and as we've seen from this week, it appears that things are running much more smoothly, although I know that's not a unanimous opinion. But it does seem that the lines have gone down significantly. So that's what you can kind of expect on Election Day. The last thing I'll say about voting in this election is do not expect a decision unless it's a true landslide on election night or even probably the next day. Why? Because some states are mail always. Oregon, for example, or Colorado is almost an all-mail ballot, M-A-I-L ballot. They mail it to you, you return it, that's it. There's very few people who vote in person on machines in those states. New York has very limited early voting. It kind of surprises people, but it's true. And Pennsylvania does not allow you to start counting absentee ballots until polls close. In Georgia, we have a modified plan where they can feed your ballot through the machine, but it can't tabulate it. So in other words, all the information's there, but you don't hit the key to count the vote until the polls close. So Georgia should be one of the, among the early states. Pennsylvania, we can expect to go pretty late. Same with some of the others. So if you've liked the 2020 election, and I know that so many people have, it will be likely continuing for some time after the election itself.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. And that's really good too, because you anticipated a lot of the questions that we have in our Q&A. The most important is, hey, when do we know what's going to happen with the election? And I guess the answer is, well, we're really not sure yet. So, but I mean, that seems to be something that's going around right now. And so, I appreciate that. And especially, I know we have a lot of questions too in the question and answer about what to do with my absentee ballot. I know that's a question I got from my parents. And just like Josh, at this point, I would advise anyone either take it to a drop box or go in person to go vote either early or on election day. And you can either, and like you said, it's a lot easier if you take your ballot with you. But I know when I went to early vote the other day, the gentleman next to me had his absentee ballot. He left it at home, and they very easily canceled it out of the system for him and allowed him to go vote in person. And it was a very easy and smooth process. So, I think that's good. And I think this sort of gets us to the other part outside of absentee voting and early in person, which is sort of the overall issue about access to voting. And I know you touched a little bit in terms of the day of, the lines the day of, but I really wanted to, open it up to Teos, and especially in terms of not just from the grassroots perspective, but sort of an on the ground perspective of what can we expect to happen on election day? What are things that we're going to see? What are things we're going to need to watch out for? And if you are voting on election day and you feel that you're being suppressed or intimidated, or someone shouldn't be there, what should you do?
Absolutely. And once again, thank you everyone for having me today. I appreciate being a part of the panel, and to all the other panelists, I appreciate joining you all today. One of the things in terms of the election in general, and if people are seeing things that maybe they think are incorrect or should not be taking place, for them to know that there is a process in place and that they can report and bring any issue to the election superintendent. And so another thing I want to talk about where that's concerned is poll watching. And I think poll watching is something that's also very important in this election. And you've probably heard a lot of people advocating for poll watching, and it's nonpartisan. It's on both sides that parties are advocating for people to become poll watchers. Even on their websites, you can go to either party website and register to become a poll watcher. But typically, poll watchers are appointed by political parties, and the whole point is to monitor, to assist in ensuring a fair election outcome. And so these are individuals who are making it their business to see that the election process is handled appropriately and that the outcome is as fair as possible. In national elections, political parties can appoint 2 poll watchers per precinct. So in the state of Georgia, we have 3,000 voting precincts in the state. And so typically you can appoint 2, parties typically appoint 2 per precinct. And they can also have 2 at the actual tabulating centers where the votes are being counted. What do poll watchers do? So poll watchers are allowed inside of the actual polling location. And so these individuals are also allowed throughout the tabulating centers. And basically they look at the conduct, look at what's going on, look at what's taking place, looking at the process overall, and really trying to ensure, once again, that things are being handled appropriately. They also can track their own party's election day turnouts. However, they are not allowed to interfere with the actual election in any kind of way. And I think that that's important for people to know as well. So their responsibility, if they notice any irregularities within the, at the polling location, if they want to challenge voter eligibility, they don't directly confront the individual. What they do is they bring the issue, or they're supposed to bring the issue, to the election superintendent. And that is the top election official in the county. So bring the issues, they raise the issues and bring them to that individual. They are not to directly challenge voters in particular. Also, the superintendent then decides how to proceed based on the poll watcher's concerns. And so they report the concerns, and then the superintendent really makes the decision as far as what the course of action will be with respect to those concerns. How do you become a poll watcher? Like I said, it is a nonpartisan type thing where both Democratic and Republican parties allow volunteers to sign up on the website. And literally any voter has the right to report whether it's suspicious activity or concerns to the election officials at their polling place. And so you don't have to be a poll watcher, and you can still report. Any voter reserves the right to report at their polling place. Another important restriction is regarding campaigning. And so there's no campaigning allowed by poll watchers and those who are assisting in the election process. It is illegal to actively campaign for candidates or to try to intimidate or to persuade a voter to vote in a particular direction. And so poll watchers are there to observe. They're not there to interfere. They're not there to tell people how they should be voting. They are there to observe the process and make sure that it's handled appropriately. And for those who do intimidate or try to persuade votings, that is a federal offense. And so those are some of the means and some of the things that can be expected. And if people are interested in becoming a poll watcher, then it's an easy process to sign up to do so. And like I said, you don't even have to be a poll watcher to also still report or bring issues that you see or things that are concerning to you at a particular polling location. The other thing that's going to be important is the voter registration. So who was able to even register to become a voter. So the current law right now is that you have to be a citizen of the United States. You need to be a legal resident of the county in which you're voting. You must be at least 17 and a half by the time that you register, and 18 years of age by the time that you actually vote. The other restriction is you cannot have been found mentally incompetent by a judge where voting is concerned. And when we talk about, I know earlier there was some discussion about access to voting and even the right to vote. One of the things that has also come up is felons and them not being allowed to vote in elections and not having the right to participate in elections. And those are, you cannot be actively serving a sentence for conviction of a felony involving what's considered moral turpitude. And so in terms of voting, those are some of the things to look out for. In terms of poll watching, if you see anything that's suspicious, any suspicious activity going on at the polls, you have the right to report that. But there is a process in place, as well as you are not to influence individuals concerning how they should or should not be voting if you do choose to take the option of being a poll watcher.
Thank you, Teos. That was definitely very informative, and I think that's something that all of us really, need to be cognizant about, whether or not it's our own ability to vote or our friends and neighbors. So I think those are all really important issues. And I kind of want to go over to Sarah and have her talk a little bit more about just on get out the vote and election day and sort of election day get out the vote. You alluded to earlier, for example, giving people rides to the polls, different sorts of voter outreach, that what we can do and what we can't do in terms of get out the vote. And then we got to get back to the questions and answers, because this has been so great, but I know we're getting short on time.
And you know what? I don't want to do too much about what we can and can't, because I really trust the experts like Josh and Teos when it comes to substantively what we can and can't do. But in general, I just think that on all the campaigns I've worked on, the get out the vote effort is just really a large part, because, unfortunately, there is a lot of the electorate and a lot of our peers, none of us here on this call, but that do need a little more encouragement and a little more, folks seeing on the street corners with signs and waving and just encouragement to become part of the process. So I definitely don't want to speak to, just all the legalities, but besides just in general, how important those get out the vote efforts are. And especially when you think of people that traditionally aren't part of the political process and, think, oh, it doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter. Again, I mentioned, and I think Josh mentioned also, how there have been many elections that have been won by razor thin margins. So just to emphasize how important that is.
Yep. And I that is very true. We are looking at razor thin margins, and I think that is something that, it's going to be very interesting to do. And one of the questions we had, really relating to turnout and getting out the vote, is sort of these ideas on election day. The idea of rain on election day suppresses some voters, rain in the morning versus rain in the afternoon, when different voters vote. The same way where Josh was alluding to during early voting, you've got the W on when people come. I think we have similar issues on election day as well. And is there anything we can look at, or is 2020 just going to be so crazy that all of the shibboleths go out the window, as they say?
But isn't rain more of a spiritual, godly thing that we can't control, as opposed to those regulations that we were talking about that are specifically man or woman enacted? That's the question. I don't know.
No, I guess so, but so maybe there is someone trying to put their hand on the scales during election day.
Right. I guess I just personally feel more comfortable when it's something weather that impacts vote, as opposed to, regulations that maybe impact, but that, just personally.
And I think that's why it's important too, for voters to make a plan to vote. Make a plan in case of inclement weather, in case of transportation issue. Make a plan to vote. Plan the timeframes. I know Josh gave some really good information as far as windows that may be more feasible to get your vote in a quick manner. But make a plan to vote, and also not just planning for yourself, but plan to bring other people to the polls too. As they've said earlier, we're experiencing record-breaking numbers, and I think there's a lot of reason for that. And so encouraging people to come out, not just making a plan for yourself, but those around you or within your sphere of influence, and making sure that you do get to the polls, regardless of weather or any other challenge that you may experience, or even long lines, if they are at a particular polling location. Just knowing, and I think even Fulton has a mechanism in place where you can actually track the wait times. And so,
and Gwinnett.
Yes.
Fulton and Gwinnett, I believe.
Yeah, so things of that nature I think are really helpful too, but definitely make a plan, be intentional about it, and make sure you get to the polls.
Yep. And I don't know with chat what people get or not, but Josh suggested, and we'll get the phone numbers. So we're going to put out some phone numbers if you see something that you don't think is right, to the Secretary of State's election and some other resources that if if something just doesn't feel right to you, either during early voting or during election day, to please contact and let people know whether or not it impacts you, your neighbors, or just looks kind of strange. There are people out there, who you can reach out to. So I think that's very, some very important issues. And it's sort of like, we had a question about election day poll issues, and we kind of talked about that, but correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't think in Georgia you can't just walk up to someone in line and be like, well, are you really registered to vote? Are you an eligible voter? And where is that line, and when does that become voter suppression or intimidation? Or the same thing, what do you do if you feel that you yourself are in line waiting to vote and you're being unreasonably challenged by a quote unquote poll watcher? Whether or not it's calling the hotline, what are the things to do or not to do? So kind of throw that out there. And Josh, you're not on mute, so we'll let you go first.
Sure. I'll say there's two numbers, and I'll leave it to you if you see an issue or experiencing an issue, which one you want to call. One is the Secretary of State's, and we are looking that up. I know it starts with 470, but it's a hotline that goes to the Elections Division, and there you can report things that you see that are not, as Julie put, the way they should be happening. And that could be anything from, we've had people call in because folks are distributing water to people in line. And there's a question of, are they doing that? If the water bottle says on it a candidate's name, that's not a good idea if you're within 150 feet of the polling location. If you're outside that, fair game. But then there's another, if you don't feel comfortable calling the Secretary of State, the ACLU, the Lawyers Committee, various groups, civil rights organizations have another number, and it's 866 vote. We'll look it up. But they will report things and help resolve issues as well. And I do want to take some time to say this, because there is a lot of, and please don't read Twitter when it comes to what's happening on election day and whatnot. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation that goes out. There's a lot that's helpful. But one thing that you get when you see Twitter is you think everybody just can't stand one another. That's actually not the way it works for a good deal of people. I was on a call today with both the ACLU and the Secretary of State's office. They talked about the working relationship they have when they see an issue, try to address an issue, they seek input. And while it doesn't get reported, there's a lot that happens in the background that you don't see, where the issues get resolved. And certainly we're going to have disagreements, and some of those will get litigated, but I think everybody is trying to make sure that folks can be able to vote, and there are resources available to you if you feel you can't.
And Josh, that line for the ACLU is 866-OUR-VOTE. That's 1-866-687-8683.
And Josh, that's funny you say that, because I actually talked with an attorney today who worked with Stacey Abrams, and I mentioned your name, and she said, we really were on opposing sides, but I have so much respect for him. So I think you embody that, because I literally heard that today. So
well, that's good.
Good job.
They're great lawyers over there, and that's a good example. We've had good working relationships, and we've been able to resolve some things. Frankly, they gave us some ideas. And one of the things you see that the Secretary has now is what's called ballot tracks. And it's if you get a mail-in ballot, you can track it. They can email you and tell you it's been received. They can email you or text you and tell you that it's been counted. Other states have used it. Georgia now is too. That's something they brought to folks' attention, and it's now making people feel more confident in their absentee voting.
It's interesting you mentioned ballot track, because one of the questions we had, and I think it sort of goes to the question, is what is the state of Georgia or the state's obligation to the voters to provide ease of voting? And not really from a legal standpoint, but what's the right thing to do? And that sounds like the sort of thing, there's no legal obligation for the Secretary of State to provide that service, but it's the right thing to do. It makes people happy. It's a service provided by our state. So, what other things can we do as a state or, other organizations to ease voting and, increase access and make it easier, whether or not it's for us or our parents or the person voting the first time to go out and vote? Throwing this out to you guys.
I'll be brief, because I know there's a lot of things people want Georgia to do in addition, things like allowing ballots to be received later and whatnot. But Georgia overall has very friendly voting laws. And by that, I mean the opportunities to vote early in Georgia are longer than a lot of states. In fact, I believe most states. No excuse needed. Absentee balloting. The mandatory Saturday voting, every county has to have at least one Saturday. Counties can do more, and they do. some on Sundays we've seen. And so those are things that compare, if you look at it from other states, those are things that puts Georgia in a good light. I know there's disagreements, and I won't get into those. Maybe some others can, but comparatively, at least, it is easier to count or vote in Georgia than many states in the country.
Now, in terms of, on the day of election, poll requirements, we know in Georgia that there's a voter ID requirement. But what are some things that you can do? For example, if you show up and you don't have your ID, what should you do? And provisional voting. We do have provisional voting. What does that mean if you cast a provisional vote? And what, if anything, do you have to do subsequent to casting that provisional vote?
I can take it unless someone else.
Okay, I guess it's going to Josh.
Yeah, if you don't have your ID, and remember too, there's various forms of ID. Student ID, people have used, it has to be a photo. Okay, so you need a photo. You can, but if you have a photo ID, you can vote. If you don't bring it with you and you get all the way up there, you can cast what's called a provisional ballot. It will be a hand-marked paper ballot. You go into a different booth area and you seal it, much like an absentee ballot is what it looks like. You'll then have 3 days to get to your county election office and provide a photo ID. Some counties allow that to occur via electronic means. If you want to scan and send them a picture of your photo ID or take a picture of it and email it, that works. But check with your county when you do it. But voting provisional does not mean your vote is not going to be counted. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means if you're doing it because you didn't bring a photo ID, you'll have to show one later. Some people, if they show up and the lines are too long, you'll vote what's called an emergency ballot. And that is by paper as well. That is automatically counted. It may say provisional ballot on the ballot itself, just depending on how many they've handed out, but that is counted as a regular ballot. So don't worry if you're in line and they ask if you want to cast an emergency paper ballot, even if it says provisional ballot, that should be counted as well. It just means it's a way of easing the lines.
What should I do if I show up to my polling place that's, on my precinct card and I'm not registered at that location, but my precinct card says I am, or I show up and I'm no longer registered to vote, but I've got the card that says I am? Is that also a provisional voting situation?
It should be a provisional voting situation. If you just show up in the wrong location, for example, like you go to the wrong precinct, you can still cast a ballot and you will get your statewide, your presidential, all the things that don't turn on what precinct you're in will count if you're in the right county. Do not go to the wrong county to vote. The vote will not count. But if you cast a provisional because of what they've told you that your address isn't matching up, you have that 3-day rule to go and try to fix it. And your county election officials will work with you on what you would need to show.
Okay. Now, we had a couple questions about absentee balloting as well. And I know, it's already sort of been touched into in the ballot tracking, but just because your ballot has been accepted, does that mean that your ballot can't then subsequently be challenged, your absentee ballot? Like, just because you see on the vote tracker that it's in the office, does that necessarily mean that it's going to be counted? And the reason why I bring this up is when I went to early vote the other day, I didn't realize that my license now says Atlanta, and I put the city I live in, which is Doraville. And the lovely poll worker said to me, and I actually heard the person three people over had the same exact issue, well, your license says Atlanta on it. So I'm concerned when I previously voted absentee over the summer that because I wrote Doraville rather than Atlanta, is that going to for example, get my ballot kicked out? Or the fact that I have the signature of a doctor, even though I'm an attorney, is that going to get my ballot kicked out? And those are sort of the questions that I get with absentee balloting. And I know, Sarah, you know a little bit about what's going to happen too. So I hate to pick on you, but I was going to get your opinion on that a little bit and then throw it out there.
I'm sorry, my opinion on what happens if you cast an absentee ballot.
or for example, if, you know, what's going to happen if my signature looks just a little bit different? You know, is my vote still going to be counted? And is there anything that I can do? Like, how would I know to go up to the elections office? Is there any procedure for me to go up to the elections office?
I'm not the one to ask that. I say, yes, go up and make sure your vote counts if you have any questions. But I don't know. Let's ask Teos and Josh. I'm not sure.
All right, we'll throw it to you guys. What should I do if I think my ballot's been challenged?
You know, where this comes in, and you'll appreciate this, is particularly municipal and county elections where votes get really thin. My first case after I finished working for the governor was a challenge to the mayor's race in Franklin, Georgia. And they challenged ballots after they'd been counted, saying that they should not have been counted. And so there's a whole process that goes by that allows someone to come in, and you're really challenging the election. And if you're challenging the election, you can say X number of people voted that should not have voted. For example, in that case, it was college students who weren't there long enough to establish residency. That was kind of it, or a guy that, you know, just happened to be coming back in town. I mean, it was a 7-vote margin deal. So that's where it would come in. That means it won't count for that particular race, but it doesn't mean that it may not count depending on what the issue is for president, senator, on down the line. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but that's where it would come up.
Yeah. And we had a question, does early voting count as absentee voting? And if so, why is that? Why is early in-person voting considered absentee voting?
The answer is really boring. The way the law was set up, you had absentee voting by mail, and then they decided to open it up for early voting. So it's called absentee in person is the technical name. But when you see statistics on how people voted, you'll typically see a breakdown of absentee by mail and early vote, even though they're the same thing. But it's calling things something, and it's just the way that voting in Georgia evolved. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah. Now, Sarah, I think you can answer this question, because one of the panelists, since you mentioned Stacey Abrams, they wanted to know if you had any info on what's going on with Fair Fight and some of the voter issues that are being tracked by Fair Fight right now, which is, you know, the organization I believe that Stacey Abrams started for voting, and what other, you know, voter issues should we be looking for right now, whether or not Georgia or nationally?
Yeah, you know, I also want Josh to give us more specifics just because he's worked with this, but, you know, I just know in general that there were different issues that actually I was surprised that the judge recognized that our voting system was broken and we needed some improvements. You know, so I think we are making progress, and I'm really proud of the progress that we've made. But I don't know the specific issues in Stacey's case, besides the fact that the judge recognized that our system is broken and we do need some improvements.
Right. Now, and then those are definitely very much issues. Now, I had another question, and I think this one goes to Teos. Hold on. I got out of got off of my list of questions here. Yeah, we got absentee. So this sort of goes back to Ben's topic on redistricting and gerrymandering, and you know, how, because of the end of the 2020, theoretical early end of the 2020 census, can you sort of talk about how the census is going to, you know, going forward, how it may or may not affect our, I don't want to say gerrymandering, but redistricting to come up. And also, I know some of us are more familiar with the fact that the Supreme Court, as Ben said, is going to have a hearing on November 30th about whether or not we count people who are unauthorized people in our country within the census, and how that may or may not affect such issues, you know, sort of the issue of redistricting going forward, and whether or not it's redistricting or whether or not it's, you know, how much money per capita DeKalb County is going to get because of the census. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and how the count's going to affect us.
So the census, just to be clear, the census is all about making sure communities receive adequate funding. And so the huge push with getting people to participate in the census was that, to Ben's point, if you have a community, and I'll use different numbers, if you have a community with 100 people who have participated in the census, but that community has 3,000 individuals, then now those 100 people, the government is only going to provide resources for the amount of people that have actually completed the census. One of the dangerous things regarding the census here in Georgia was that Georgia was one of the lowest in terms of census participation. I think Georgia, I don't know where we finished, but I know Georgia was second to last in actual census participation. And how that can affect us moving forward, of course, is those communities receiving adequate funding and that those monies being allocated appropriately throughout those areas that need them most. And so I know a lot of the discrepancies and a lot of the issues were with, okay, well, are these communities going to receive the funding that they need? In addition to that, as Ben pointed out, also affecting representation and the amount of representation afforded to communities based on the numbers that they have provided. And Josh and Sarah may be able to shed a little more light on that where litigation is concerned. I'm not familiar with the active litigation, but those are some of the things that the census does, why it's been important, and why there was such a huge push for the census, although Georgia was really lagging behind in terms of actual participation.
Thank you. No, I think, I think that's interesting. And I knew that we weren't doing great with our census participation here in Georgia. I didn't realize it was, it was as bad as that. And I know, especially where I live, I live in Doraville, which has a very large immigrant population and minority population. And there have been, very much concerted efforts on the part of our city council and our mayor to encourage people to fill out the census. But I know that especially because of a lot of the publicity, there were many people who were wary about doing it. So we're very concerned to see, what happens in terms of who does and does not get counted. Most importantly, because as you said, it goes towards money that cities, counties, municipalities funding that you'll get back from the federal government. So, I think it's important, and it is a shame, as Ben said, that if you waited till tomorrow to do the census, you're too late. Like, I filled it out the first day. I thought everybody did that.
And there's
Helen Smith will tell you that's the only thing I ever did early and on time.
I was going to say, and there was so much uncertainty. A lot of people unfortunately interpreted the census as just a means of tracking and being intrusive into personal information. And so that is the unfortunate part. But to Ben's point, it's too late at this point, but it is not too late to vote. And so we can definitely steer efforts, that momentum towards the ballot at this point. And regardless of who you choose to vote for, it's important to get out and make sure that you do exercise your right to vote.
And just, I guess, for the individual that was asking the question about the issues, and Stacey Abrams, they said it's a comprehensive constitutional challenge to the entire voting rights system in Georgia, which disproportionately affects Black and Brown voters. So sorry, it's not more specific. I think we kind of knew that, but that's the overall issue that will hopefully be resolved.
I mean, and that's a very big issue that we've got, that we're continuously dealing with in Georgia. So, and that's definitely very important. So I think we got through, I know we had a lot of questions, but I feel like we really answered them either in everyone's individual everyone's individual talks or in our questions and answers. And really it was about absentee voting and mail-in voting, early voting, what to do if you get challenged at a poll. There was a question about military and overseas absentee ballots. Do they have a different date that they have to be in? That was sort of, I don't really think we touched on that. Josh, I don't know if you have the answer to that. I thought military ballots had a little longer time, or does that not also, they need to be 7 p.m. in the Secretary of State's office?
No, federal law provides that military ballots have, I believe it's 5 or 7 days after the close of the poll to get in. It's a federal statute, UACAVA, that says that, and our state law tracks it.
Good, good. And I think everyone can see that Haley put up that the United States Postal Service recommends, if you are going to put your absentee ballot in the mail, to do it by October 27th. I'd heard from other people October 16th. I think just like Josh said earlier, if you are planning on doing your ballot absentee, take it to the drop box. The drop boxes they're unlike Texas, where there is only one drop box per county. In Georgia, we have a lot of drop boxes. So you can go onto your county webpage and see where it is. If you're in the metro area, I mean, there are a lot of drop boxes, and they are all in public visible places, and there is a camera on them. They're locked. It's, I looked at mine in front of my city hall, and it looks as secure, if not more secure. It's just like a postal box. It's a metal lock box. And as I said, there is a camera on it, and it's a felony to tamper with. So, we should feel secure in putting those ballots in the lock box, or if you feel comfortable voting in person, take your absentee ballot up to early voting or in-person voting, and turn it in and get it invalidated. And, I had one more question. Since we only have 2 weeks left, up to the election, what would be, for a person that wants to get involved, that wants to volunteer, wants to be involved, what sort of opportunities would you recommend to a person, whether or not you want to get involved in the campaign, or just getting involved in increasing voter turnout with your friends and families? And I think, Sarah, I'm going to put that one to you, just things you can encourage people to do to volunteer and get involved.
There's so many different ways, from the most simplest of, downloading apps. I think both campaigns and even local campaigns have apps on your phone that you can download and text people extremely easily, or call people and encourage them to get out to vote. Now in our new virtual environment, there's so many different Zoom opportunities where you can get on different Zoom calls and discuss issues and talk to other people about your voting plans and about issues that are meaningful to you. The other day, that we did an early childhood education one. What else? You can stand on a street corner and hold a sign. You can volunteer to do a really quick training and go down to the polls and help people more easily vote and protect the integrity of the election. Really almost as active as you want to be, or as little as you want to do, you can do it. In today's world with technology. So I just encourage everyone to actually participate and be a part of this process. And I thank you to you, Julie. I've learned so much on being a panelist and listening to Ben's video, and you and Josh and Teo. So thank you very much for hosting this and putting this together.
Well, we have to thank the Alumni Association and really putting this together, and the Pace Black Alumni Association for putting this together, because it's been a great, I said the same thing. I've learned so much, and, this has been so wonderful. I'd also mention you can send pizzas to people in line. You're allowed to do that as long as it doesn't. I know there's a bunch of GoFundMes. Send pizzas to people in line. And, Teos and Josh, if you have any suggestions on how you can increase voter turnout and just getting other ways to get involved, even if it's just voting and telling your friends to vote.
And I would say also transporting people to the polls. So you can volunteer and assist with that. Other organizations, I know like Urban League is doing Lyft credits. And so if you have difficulties getting to the polls, then there are organizations who can provide Uber or Lyft credits to assist you in getting there. The other thing you can do is participate in phone banks. I know a lot of phone banking is going on, trying to encourage people, once again, checking to see if they have voted, or if you have not voted, encouraging you to do so. And so there are tons of volunteer opportunities, holding a sign, and all of it really does help. And so if you want to get involved, you can definitely do so, for sure.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's all.
Ross, maybe.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say thank you to Ross Brown, who was, at PACE when we were there, Josh. So thank you for, maybe this was his idea, or the entire Black Alumni Association. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll close on a bit of good news. When you ask about what can you do, I was on a panel this morning and this question was asked, I want to be a poll worker. Can I do it? And the answer at this point in Fulton was no. They're full. Their wait list is huge. So even with the increased number of polling locations, the amount of people through lots of efforts from, again, civil rights groups, the secretary, business community, everybody has encouraged people to be a poll worker, and Georgians have responded. It's a really great thing to see.
Well, I really can't thank everybody enough. This has been just a wonderful, informative, great evening. And you guys, this has been wonderful for all of me. And I thank all of our panelists. I thank Haley for being the wizard behind the curtains and running the Zoom. And, I have an old yearbook picture of Josh that I was going to put up, just so you guys know. The double-breasted suit and the tie that Josh has always been Josh, and he hasn't changed since we were in high school. So I just had to pull that out to show everybody. And, and we actually had a quick question. Is it okay to send pizza? I thought it's not okay to send pizza, but as long as you're not doing it from a campaign, I thought it was okay to send pizza. Correct, Josh?
Yeah, you can't do it from a campaign or a group that will encourage you to vote for a particular candidate. But my suggestion would be stay 150 feet outside the polling place, so then you just don't have an issue on it.
And don't wear a candidate's T-shirt to go vote, because they'll make you turn it inside out.
I've done that, and you're not supposed to.
Yeah, I've done it too, and you're not supposed to. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Haley. Thanks to PACE, and we really appreciate everyone tuning in. And like everyone else said, vote. We're not going to quote, I don't know if it was Richard Daley who said vote early, vote often, but I think everyone, just get out there, vote, encourage your friends and family to vote. And I know we're all going to be popping popcorn on election night. So thank you guys. This has been wonderful. And, you guys rock. Get out the vote.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.